Welcome to the Los Altos History Show. I'm Nan Geschke, your guest host. We'll be speaking with Steve Acid and Mark Sandoval. Welcome, Steve and Mark.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome to the History Show. Both Steve and Mark have a keen interest in historical preservation. Steve is a contractor and designer. Mark is a local architect. And as I said, they have this interest in historical preservation, but I know them best as Los Altos Historical Commissioners, for I'm a commissioner as well. I thought for the benefit of our viewers this evening, Steve and Mark, that it might be interesting for our viewers to know just what the Historical Commission is, what we do, and also what kinds of projects we support and what we're responsible for. You want to start off, Steve?
The Commission oversees the operation of History House with its many events and exhibits, and also is responsible for the resources inventory.
The essay contests, and we also produce this show, as well as we have some of the educational videos, such as Sense of Place.
Good. I think the essay contest is one of the most visible projects that the Historical Commission really does for the town, and it involves all public and private school children from 3rd grade through 6th grade. And last year we involved almost 800 students in the contest, so I think
it was quite successful.
It's quite successful, right? Very successful. Now, you mentioned that this inventory, is that this is something that all cities do, or for example, is it something that was just adopted by Los Altos?
There's a number of the cities in the area have inventories, Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, Los Gatos, and others, as well as throughout the state and across the nation. The state, in California, the state actually has forms that they encourage all the local communities to use, and they have a certified local government program that encourages to follow a certain format in the development of the inventory.
Okay, so how do you go about compiling such an inventory?
In Los Altos, we started out by first of all doing a windshield survey, and we arbitrarily sent a group of volunteers out to look throughout the community by dividing it up into different areas, and to take photographs of any building or resource that they felt was built or constructed before 1945. If they weren't sure, it didn't matter. And then following the completion of the windshield survey, we then hired a consultant who had experience with doing other inventories, who reviewed this information, then went and got all the information that we had on the buildings, which included their address, a map of where they were located, a photograph, when they thought the building was built or when they knew it was built.
Quite a lot of research went into each of these properties.
And this is a one-page, two-sided form that we used. And with all this information in hand, it was reviewed in hopes of establishing what the most significant contexts were in the town, context being the aspects of the community development which were most significant and most pronounced within the community.
Okay, so this inventory then is a physical document, and where is it available?
It's available at the City Hall, and I think we have the...
We had a copy of it. I'm sorry, I have to apologize to the viewers, but we forgot to put it on the set tonight, so you can't really see it. But it's a binder, and it has a text draft, and it also has forms with a description of the properties that have been evaluated by the Historical Commission. Now, you mentioned in developing this text or context, what were those contexts, Steve, again?
We decided that there were 5 significant contexts. The archaeological sites that preceded the arrival of the train, transportation, agriculture, which I guess actually preceded the train, residential development, commerce, the commercial development, and the institutions within the community. So that we have those 6 contexts.
Okay, 6 then.
Actually 6, yes.
Right. Okay, so that was developed as a context, and it was kind of an evolutionary process in really developing the inventory.
Right.
Okay, so in determining how a property ranked, for example, you mentioned criteria or, ways to describe property. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Once the contexts were established, the notion behind the context being that you may only have one example of an archaeological site, but by virtue of the fact that there's only one, it becomes of major significance.
Sure.
Where you may have 40 examples of a particular architectural style.
A craftsman house,
Right.
something of that nature.
Right. So Harold Kallman developed a book on the evaluation of historic structures, or not a book, but a methodology, and using his format, the Historical Commission established their own grading or awarding of points to each of the resources, which would include its age, the purity of its architectural style, the condition and integrity of the original building, the people associated with it, and its context. And using points and formula, we were able to establish the relative significance of each of the resources within each of the context.
Okay, so maybe it would be good at this point, Steve, to kind of ask for an example, either from you or Mark, in terms of a building. Not that you would be able to give exact points, but for example, in one of the properties that we are going to be designating soon, the Paul Schaup House, give the viewers an example of how those criteria, how the house would be evaluated against those kinds of criteria.
Well, I can start with saying that it's an excellent example of a craftsman house that we have in town. Obviously, the significance of the individual is also another. Do you want to?
Well, Paul Schaup is one of the founding fathers of the downtown area, in that he came in and bought the property that now occupies the Orange and University Avenue area, and led in its development. The architects that he chose to design his house, Wolf and Mackenzie, have several buildings on the National Register, and has many of the characteristics. The house maintains much of its original integrity, particularly across the front facade of the building, although there have been remodels following the earthquake, where some of the rear of the building was changed after review by the Historical Commission.
I guess compiling this inventory is all well and good, but why should we be concerned at all with preservation, Mark? I mean, California and Los Altos is a rather young community, I mean, in contrast to some of the other communities in the United States.
Well, to preserve our resources, it's very important, because it gives us a sense of the importance of events and people connected to the development of the town or our communities, and it represents the values of our community, not only past, but present as well as future. And I think those are very important to protect and preserve. Would you care to comment?
Yeah, the establishment of that link and of being able to use the past as a basis for establishing what an appropriate use for the future would be it's an important part of the process of design and of city planning in general. And the preservation and planning actually go hand in hand and are a link to the future development of the community.
So it's our basis, in other words, from which the community develops and views itself.
Right.
Okay.
And many of these assets are the most important parts of the that community. They draw on tourism, they draw on future residents, because it establishes the values of that community. Good example, people move to, let's say, Professorville because of the way in which the streetscape and the community has developed those properties.
The character within that particular group of houses in Palo Alto is something that's desired by people moving into the area, and it's something that the people within the area want to maintain. So the preservation effort tries to identify what characteristics that have their basis in history and how to best preserve them while still allowing for the development of the area.
Okay. Now, by having a historical residence or commercial building, for that matter, isn't this a violation of your personal property rights, Mark?
Well, all properties are subject to some sort of governmental regulation, whether it's zoning, building codes, or other ordinances. If a person with a designated property would exercise their potential rights under having it designated, it's actually a benefit. It allows them certain exemptions as to some of the building codes, and that is due to the fact that we have a historical code which supersedes many of the regulations in the Uniform Building Code. It also allows for certain exemptions if the findings are met for variances. And in addition to that, there's tax incentives. If the property does qualify for the Mills Act, there could be some reduction in the property tax on that property.
There's always, over the past 20 years at least, there have been a number of different ways in which tax incentives, primarily for commercial property, but also for residential property, have come and gone, and there's been various aspects to them, and that's a continuing process. There's the issue of facade easements that can become a tax incentive, or the Mills Act, or commercial.
So you're saying that there are certain properties about a historical building that could be viewed differently or considered differently. For example, if it were higher than the code is currently, that could be taken into consideration? Or
possible setbacks or other things. We just finished with a property where we had to review some of the current zoning requirements as far as restrictions. So it really isn't just another layer of regulation. It actually provides a flexibility within the building codes and ordinances to develop that property.
So what you're saying is that actually homeowners with historic property have more leniency in some respects to
flexibility.
Right. That's a better word.
It's quite possible that if the historic integrity of the building is to preserve, and there's something about the building that's in violation of the current ordinance, that there can be some accommodation made to permit a continuous use of the building without impinging on its integrity.
Right. Now, are there any communities here in California or across the United States that have done a really good job of historical preservation, do you think?
There's a number of them. Pasadena, the list goes on and on. Santa Barbara.
Carmel.
Yeah, Carmel by the Sea. And they've implemented certain restrictions, or I should say, considerations as to the development of these resources.
Right. In the United States, too,
Williamsburg.
Williamsburg is an excellent example. St. Augustine, where
Boston, Philadelphia.
San Antonio too,
Yes.
San Antonio.
where tourism is really based on their old towns. Is that right?
Yes, Sacramento, Old Town, is a good example as well. That is one of the more successful stories in California.
Now, are there any? Is there any possibility that this could happen in Los Altos? Are there any, for example, historical neighborhoods or districts that we should be considering?
There's the downtown Triangle area has been looked at once. There's also the University Orange Avenue area. One of the early tract developments in town was off of Paso Robles Avenue.
In North Los Altos.
Yeah, and then South Los Altos, there's the Loyola Corners, with
Yes.
a group of small houses that maintain an individual character. To the
So there's a
neighborhood.
number of properties or districts or potential districts in Los Altos.
Okay. Now, what would a homeowner, for example, who doesn't have historical designated home, would they have any responsibilities if they were to live in a historic district?
Yes, their responsibility. A set of guidelines would be established similar to guidelines that we have for all of Los Altos now, but that would be particular to the neighborhood. Sure. In the University Orange Avenue area, a set of guidelines would be developed that identify the characteristics of that neighborhood, and future development within that neighborhood would be guided towards the maintenance of that neighborhood. We've, in the downtown Los Altos area, in the Triangle, when Ramsey's Garage went, the Historical Commission had looked at that as a district, and although we didn't designate it as a district, we did develop a set of guidelines that showed how the buildings within the area, in the whole triangle, related to each other, passed those guidelines on to the Planning Commission, which then adopted them as guidelines for the planning philosophy in the town, and the development on corner of First and State was one of the first
Good
groups
example of that.
used that,
Right.
where the character of the 25-foot increment and the height and the angle of the facades off the streetscape were maintained.
Let's talk a little bit about historical designation itself. I know that not a lot, but there have been a few buildings in town, commercial buildings, and there have been now some residential buildings that have been designated. Can you give some good examples for viewers buildings that they may be able to recognize?
Well, obviously the train station, a very good example. There's others in the downtown area as well.
Early buildings by the Los Altos Land Company, which is on the corner of First and Main Street,
yeah.
and the building across the street on the corner of Second and Main.
That E of S building was once a grocery store.
Grocery store, First Boy Scout, and First Classes.
Community center.
Yeah.
We were basically upstairs for the
right.
Boy Scouts.
And the
Right.
Classes.
So the residences that are really significant, the Winchester or Miriam House.
Over off of, parallel with El Monte, the Winchester Merriman House is the oldest building in town, and Sarah Winchester helped in the remodel of the original building, which dates back to the maybe 1860s or earlier.
And Sarah Winchester, as she
It's the Winchester Mystery House.
Merriman is her
Yes,
sister.
Her sister.
Right, so we get the
So
context
it's one of
there.
the oldest wood frames. Portion of that house is one of the oldest wood frame structures in all of Santa Clara County.
Okay. And we just recently designated a house, Ernest Coxhead. And I think we have some plans for another designation soon. Good examples of homes and buildings that you can see around town that are already designated. And I believe there's some plaques on some of those buildings.
That's correct.
Right, that give you some of the historical background. Now, getting back to the inventory, if somebody has a house on the inventory, and they find out, by looking in City Hall, at the inventory itself, that they have a house on the inventory, whether it be designated or not designated, what should they do first? Mark?
Well, I think the first thing that they would need to do is go down to the City Hall to find out if it is on the listing. Once it is on the listing, it would be advisable to set up an appointment either with the planner at the counter or the building official and some of the members of the Historic Commission to kind of review what it is that the individual applicant is thinking of proposing. With that, we can sort of set up a partnership, if you will, with the applicant and give them advice and direction and at least comment on what they're proposing and make suggestions that would be of positive nature.
The notion of a partnership is good in that if there's something particular about their project that may need a variance or the State Historic Building Code, or they may be eligible for some other considerations that they're unaware of. And so that if you have a building that's built before 1945, you should definitely go down to the building department, ask to see the inventory, check to see if your building's in there, and if it is, there's a subcommittee from the Historical Commission that would be glad to meet with you and talk to you about what things there are that they may want to consider in the development.
Well, our recent project, with the designation on Yerba Santa,
yes,
that's a good example of the Historical Commission working with the homeowner on...
As well as with planning. We had a very successful joint project. And I believe that...
Right. The owners came in, talked to us about the project, told us what they wanted to do. We identified some of the issues where they were going to need variances, talked to the planning department for them, and then later with them, and were able to establish they got a number of exceptions.
Right. So we've talked about historical buildings, but if we want to look into the future, for example, are there any, districts or buildings that you can think of that might eventually come onto the inventory?
Certainly. We have a number of buildings in town. We have some that are of the 50s period, the ranch-style homes. Some of them are the Eichler-type homes, contemporary. We also have the Chamber of Commerce building as an example, which is a significant architectural building.
So there's a
numbers,
lot of future homeowners out there that may have historical buildings in the future.
And I suppose a little aspect to it is that it's not always just the historical houses, although that's what we have most of in town, but there's also the planter boxes that the town uses for their pine trees that are the potential historical significance in the orchard around City Hall.
Which is a resource. It's not a building. So
exactly. That's a good one to remember to bring in. Well, let's sum up now. We know why, as a community, we should be concerned with historic preservation. Can you say it in a few words? What is it that we should be concerned about in Los Altos? Because Los Altos is a special community.
It's the lessons from the past that inform us about our direction, where we're going, and give us the basis for making our future decisions. It's our integrity, our soul. It's what's going to make informed planning decisions based on a knowledge of the historic past and preserving its integrity are going to make and keep Los Altos as a unique place that has its own sense of place.
Good, and I'm glad you mentioned the Los Altos' sense of place, because that's another video project that the Commission undertook this year, and we are going to be showing it in this time slot, the Los Altos History time slot, so the viewers can see it in this time slot, and also can borrow it from the library, and we'll also have it available at History House. So I want to thank you very much,
thank you for
Mark
having
and
us.
Steve, for joining us tonight. It's been very informative, and thanks for watching the Los Altos History Show. To all our viewers, we'll see you next time.